Tess Tucker, reading for my original Daughter of a Dead Woman, and here we have reached Endor. We're about a little less than halfway through Return of the Jedi. And can you tell I'm excited? I am excited because I really like this section. I feel like the characters are more developed and I understand them more. Still haven't quite grasped the whole Han doesn't really say what he feels kind of characterization, but towards the middle of Spawn of the Emperor, I kind of get the hang of it. But, let's see, the only things that I am fixing in the extended edition for this section is we kind of rush through Tess finding out different things. Like, she just found out that she's Leia's sister, and then now she's finally asking the questions that we have been begging her to ask. And it's all kind of rushed. Like, she figures out pretty much everything in the Return of the Jedi section, but it's going to be more spread out for the extended edition. So here we go. Chapter 31, Endor, 4 ABY. 1 month later. Rebel ship in the model sector. Leia Organa helped Tess Naberrie pull her long dark hair back into a swirl of braids. Ow, Tess winced as her sister accidentally tugged the sensitive hairs at her neck. Leia ignored her. There you go, the princess said, plopping Tess's brown helmet on top of the braids and giving it a few knocks just to mess with her. Tess fastened the straps under her chin and rolled her head uncomfortably. Oh, I hate these things, she confessed. Leia nodded in agreement, adjusting her own helmet before leaving the room to make other pre-battle preparations, notably making out with Han in the supply closet. Tess looked around at the other rebels, pulling the gear out of storage lockers and preparing for Endor. She felt their eyes on her every once in a while, and every whisper was no doubt a jab at the bitchy Alderaanian princess and the teenage girl she dragged along. I still have no idea why Princess Leia drags that kid around this. I mean, I've heard Tess was family or something, but if that were true, it's nothing to be ashamed of, so you'd think the princess would make that clear, right? I hear Tess is her daughter, another suggested in a hushed whisper. The princess hated being cooped up in the palace and got all rebellious when she was like 13, then went out and got herself pregnant. You're an idiot. The princess is 23 and the kid's 14. Maybe she was even younger then. The 14-year-old tried to ignore them. While it bothered Tess considerably when they underestimated her, any simple poking fun behind her back was nothing. When they talked about Leia, on the other hand, Tess grew hot with anger. If they only knew the kind of person Leia was, the sacrifices she had made for the rebellion, they would be bowing at her feet. I don't trust this princess, a woman behind her muttered. I hear she's the reason Alderaan blew up. That comment put Tess's blood on high boil. The Alderaanian pushed her feet under her and stepped over one bench so that she was right behind the woman who made that comment. What did you say? Tess muttered darkly. The woman turned around, her frizzy blonde hair hanging around her ears. She chuckled at the sight of the teenager. Lost your babysitter, kid? Tess took a deep breath before repeating her question. What did you say? Apparently amused by Tess's seriousness, the woman rose to her feet, her height looming over the younger rebel. I said, the woman articulated, she's the reason Alderaan blew up. Guess Daddy didn't give her a big enough allowance. Anger taking over completely, Tess thrust her fist up and connected with the frizzy-haired woman's face. A collective gasp and a varied array of murmurs filled the armor locker room. The woman fell back against a storage locker and Tess lunged towards her. Before she could deliver another blow, a man caught her around the waist and Tess's own speed had inertia sending her sprawling to the ground. Tess shuffled to her feet, the voices of the other rebels flooding over each other. Guys, she's a kid! Calm down! What did she do? Hold her back! She's crazy! What are you ridiculous. Doing? Stop it! Before Tess could get to the frizzy-haired woman again, a man pulled her arm behind her back, practically immobilizing her. This isn't fucking school, kid, the man boomed over the roar of the rest of the rebels. You can't just go around punching people you don't like. We're a team. We're fighting a war here. The 14-year-old had been through enough combat training with Luke and Leia to know that trying to get out of that particularly restraining hold would get her nothing but a dislocated shoulder. The crowd suddenly parted and Tess saw the frizzy-haired woman open a locker across the room. She wants to act like we're in school? The woman said. We can play along. Han watched as a couple dozen rebels filed out of the armor storage locker room. Leia was busy with other preparations, and he needed to communicate to Tess what group they would be leaving with before the flood of rebels all dispersed, and you couldn't find anyone unless they were wearing bright yellow. After the last of the rebels exited the room, Han furrowed his brows in confusion. He pulled a blonde woman aside. "Have you seen Tess? The kid." She shook her head. Han knew Tess hated to be called that, but if a rebel didn't know Tess by name, they sure as hell realized that one particular rebel was a foot shorter than the rest and looked like she was 10 years old. Before he turned around to check for the kid somewhere else, Han heard something from the storage locker room, like the clanging of metal. He walked inside. The room seemed empty at first, but then something caught the former smuggler's eye. One of the storage lockers was moving. The handle trembled slightly as he heard mechanical twists and turns coming from inside it. His heart pounded out of pure uncertainty. What was that? Then suddenly the handle rose and the locker door swung open, sending Han several steps backward with a gasp. Tess tumbled out. "What the... Tess?" Han stammered. He still hadn't quite caught his breath. "What were you doing in there?" Tess glared at him as if to tell him not to ask, but he didn't need to. He could see it all over the girl's face. This past month, she had been especially quick to anger, and he heard she'd been in some quarrels with the other rebels. He could understand why she might get some teasing from the others. She was the youngest rebel, and that gave the impression that their rank in the rebellion means nothing when it's shared with a 14-year-old girl, but that didn't mean Han liked it. "You didn't see that," Tess told Han sternly, gesturing towards the locker. "Didn't Luke and Leia decide on a force break?" Han asked. Tess glared at him. "Would you rather I stay in a locker while you guys get to deactivate the shield generator without me?" the teenager retorted. "These were special circumstances. You don't need to go running to your girlfriend telling her that her sister's a Jedi again." Tess pushed past Han, but he caught her gently by the arm. "Hey," he halted, turning the kid around to make sure she was looking at him. He didn't mention it, but he could still see the tear stains down her cheeks. "Are you all right?" Tess's angry glare softened and her breathing calmed. She nodded slowly. Han nodded back. "Good," he said simply. He squeezed her shoulder a bit and led her out of the armor storage locker room. Chapter 32. The Forest Moon of Endor. Tess Naberrie looked down at the thick vines on the Endor ground. She was already a victim of condescension amongst the group, so the worst thing she could do was fuel the fire by being the first to trip. A drop of sweat trickled down Tess's ear. The helmets they wore were hot and sweaty. Only Han went without one. Apparently, his hair was too good for that. Tess suddenly felt her feet leave the ground as Chewbacca lifted her over a tripping hazard. Her face turned red when she heard the rebels behind her chuckle. Despite her age, Tess had probably been at this longer than they had, and her blaster accuracy was only second to Leia. Besides, the rebellion wasn't exactly the most funded of organizations, and pilots aside, the requirements were not extensive for a person to fight for the rebellion. "Might as well ride on the Wookiee's back," a woman muttered from behind Tess. Han Solo, who was leading the group a few soldiers ahead, turned around just enough to keep the woman from adding another patronizing comment. "Sure," he said with fake enthusiasm. "Put a gun in her hand and we've got a 10-foot turret with 1,000 times more accuracy than any of you combined. And the Wookiee's on her side, so you piss her off and that turret's coming after you." It almost sounded like a joke, but there was something in Han's tone of voice that seemed to put the rebels in their place. Chewbacca chuckled, and Tess grinned to herself. Tess scanned the heads for Leia. With everyone's hair up in helmets and body covered in loose camouflage, there was little to tell the soldiers apart other than height. Fortunately, like Tess herself, Leia was one of the shorter ones. And of course it helped that she was normally near a hadophobic Han. Just before Tess grew bored enough to count steps, Han lifted a hand, signaling the group to stop. Everyone had been almost trance-like in their walking by now, so each soldier almost ran into the one in front of them. Han and Leia both glanced back at the rest of the soldiers to enforce the sudden halt, though Leia looked more like she was making sure everyone was still there. Tess made a face at her sister, making the princess reveal the tiniest smirk. "Oh, I told you it was dangerous here," 3PO whined, throwing his golden arms up in his dramatic way. "Shh!" Tess snapped. Han motioned downward, and the troops, Tess included, took a knee in the tall mess of vines and leaves. General Solo waved Luke, Leia, and Chewie to follow him, and Leia motioned for Tess to do the same. The 15-year-old was used to that by now. This had only been her third real battle, but that was enough to realize that even if it was moving from behind one tree to behind the next, Leia insisted Tess stay with her. At first it was annoying, as were the rest of Leia's protective tendencies, but Tess soon realized that being at Leia's side meant she got to do all the cool stuff while everyone else just waited. Han led the group of 5 around an astoundingly thick tree towards a fortress-like growth. They knelt behind it and peeked their heads over the moss. Kneeling beside Luke, Tess could see some speeder bikes and a small group of stormtroopers. Not that they were hard to spot. You'd think with all the money the Empire has, Tess thought aloud, they would be able to buy camouflage suits. Luke chuckled, if only to appease her while her sister and Carbonate Boy finished counting the troops and bikes. Should we try to go around? Leia asked no one in particular. It'll take time, reasoned Luke unenthusiastically. Though he was ever the dutiful follower of the Force in the ways of the proper Jedi, deep down he still could not shake much of his childish impatience. Han seemed to be concocting something in his head. That or he was thinking dirty thoughts about Leia. Tess could never tell those two faces apart. Finally he added, "This whole party will be for nothing if they see us." Chewie, too tall to manage a stealthy crouch, growled a suggestion from behind some branches. Han nodded and started to get up. "Chewie and I will take care of this," he decided. "You 3 stay here." He looked from Leia to Luke to Tess, lingering just a moment on the last and most likely to disobey. "Quietly," Luke reminded his friend in a hushed tone. "There might be more of them out there." Tess saw Han's cocky grin coming a mile away. "Hey, it's me." Luke, Leia, and Tess all watched him go, then faced forward to watch Han and Chewie's plan either crumble or succeed by some miraculous stroke of smuggler luck. It seemed crumbling was the Force's decision for Han today, because one of the stormtroopers heard Han behind him and whipped an arm out, sending their friend into a tree. The stormtrooper called to the rest to go for help. "Great," Luke groaned, though like Tess he probably saw it coming. "Come on." Luke pulled Leia to a stand. Tess jumped up to follow, but was nudged back down by Leia. "Stay here," ordered the princess. "If anything happens or you think we should be back and we're not, take everyone at least 1,000 meters back, if not more. I think one of the troopers was telling the others to get reinforcements, so they know we're here." The group heard at least one of the stormtroopers race out on speeder bikes. "Over there!" Leia alerted the Jedi. "2 more of them!" Tess instinctively whipped out her blaster and shot one of the stormtroopers right in the back only seconds after he boarded the speeder bike. "Make that 1, Tess corrected. "Now go!" With no time to thank her, Luke and Leia raced in the direction of the speeder bikes. Tess turned her attention back to Han, who was still wrestling with the stormtrooper. She pulled out her blaster, aimed, and fired. Only after hitting the trooper right between the eyes did she realize that as far as she was from the target and as close as he was to Han, she just as easily could have blasted his head off. "Thank the Force for my genetic blaster accuracy," she muttered to herself, waving down to Han, who was reeling in search of the miracle blast from the sky that saved his life, until he saw Tess. "You're welcome," she yelled down, raising her blaster to clarify that it was where the shot came from. Han grinned. He shook his head a bit and wagged a finger at her. "I owe you one, kid." Chapter 33. "Wait, Leia!" Luke called after the princess, focusing all his energy on catching up with her. A simple task normally, but when your legs have known nothing but moving at a lethargic pace through vines and branches for hours, they forget how to run. Leia felt it too, but she ignored it. She had her eyes set on a speeder. The princess reached the vehicle just as she lost sight of the stormtrooper, but she kept her eyes ahead and wouldn't accept the mere idea that she couldn't catch up with him. Leia didn't realize Luke was tagging along until she felt his hands around her waist. But with all of the trees clouding her vision, she was glad Luke could be the one to pull out a blaster if they needed to. "Do you know what you're doing?" Luke asked nervously, holding on tighter as Leia picked up speed. "Yes, thanks to 2 boys named Rawl and Heath Pantier," she quickly explained, raising her voice over the sound of the speeder bike engine. She didn't revert her focus from catching up with the stormtroopers. "From the patrician house of Pantier. They taught me everything I know, and within a week I was beating them in every one of our midnight races to the local marketplace and back." Leia would have grinned a bit wider at the nostalgic memory, but Alderaan was such a bittersweet subject that she felt guilty doing so. Luke raised an eyebrow. He always assumed Leia was raised to be a dutiful little princess, not a crazy kid whipping around the neighborhood on a speeder bike with the local boys. "Midnight speeder bike races, huh?" Leia grinned slightly, though Luke couldn't see her. "Not all of them," she added mysteriously. "Not all of them at midnight?" Luke inquired. Leia grinned even wider. "Not all of them were speeder bike races." Luke let out an exaggerated gasp. "Where exactly did you corrupt these poor boys at midnight?" he exclaimed playfully. "Oh, only in the reflecting pools of Alderaan," she sang. Where Raul and I had our first kiss. Leia Organa, you little harlot. It had been so long since she allowed herself to get even partially distracted from the rebellion, or anything that wasn't somber or serious, this entire year. Laughing as she drove through the trees, Leia gave Luke a teasing kick in the shin. Ow! He winced. Not bad for a prince. Look! Leia interrupted him and pointed ahead where the stormtrooper they were searching for was clearly in sight. Get your blaster ready! Luke obeyed as the princess sped up and brought their speeder bike parallel to the stormtroopers. He did a double take, then realizing he had been followed, he rammed his speeder into theirs. Dropped my gun, Luke muttered with frustration. As the trooper aimed for another bash into the side of their speeder, the Jedi expertly hopped behind the enemy and flipped the white armored clone off the bike. Suddenly, a blast shook the speeder bike that Leia was driving. They turned around to see two more troopers on bikes behind them. One of the two sped up to get closer, and the other lagged behind for defense. You get the closer one. I'll take the one in the back, Luke instructed. He immediately slowed his speeder, creating the illusion of him flying backwards. As if agreeing to their plan, the stormtrooper closest to Leia sped up until he was right by her side. Unlike his friend, this one chose to use a blaster. Leia ducked just in time to spare her head. Before she could retreat behind him and try blasting him with the bike, the stormtrooper aimed his blaster at her speeder's thrust flap. With her vehicle rendered useless, Leia was forced to tumble off the side. The princess crashed through the branches into a blanket of vines on the Endor ground. Worried she had just failed at preventing the Empire reinforcements from attacking her friends, she only raised her head long enough to see the enemy's speeder fly into some sort of tree remains. After that, Leia's head fell into the dirt as she fell unconscious. In all of her days on Dantooine that Tess spent looking at the ruins of the old Jedi Temple and imagining herself fighting alongside Jedi and soldiers alike in an attempt to destroy the evil Darth Malak, she never fantasized that rebellion would require this much waiting. It had been at least 2 standard hours since Luke and Leia took off on speeders, leaving their squad sitting in several clumps of casual conversation. Though he wouldn't admit it, Han was too worried to talk, and Tess was far from desperate enough to start a chat with 3PO, so she found herself twisting small vines into bracelets. By now she was wearing one, and the fashionable Chewie was sporting 3 on each wrist. Just as Tess finished up her 7th vine bracelet, 3PO tottered over the vines towards Han. General Solo, somebody's coming, said the protocol droid. Tess replaced the bracelet in her hand with a blaster, as the rest of the squad got the same idea. Han motioned for her to take cover behind the tree where he and Chewbacca stood. Wait, Tess whispered to Han. I think it's Luke. Han took a better look in the distance. I don't see him. Neither do I, the 15-year-old said with an intentional ambiguity. Han gave her a look, seeing as they both knew Tess was force-grounded, but it wasn't like she could help feeling Luke's presence. Now I see him, Tess breathed with a smile. Her relief was half because he was okay, half because now they could move. Luke, Han called, approaching his friend. Tess followed, looking behind him for Leia. The general asked the question on the teenager's mind. Where's Leia? What, she didn't come back? Luke exhaled. His blue eyes widened with worry. Han tensed up. I thought she was with you. We got separated, the Jedi told him defensively. We better go look for her. Tess's heart started to pound. She couldn't feel Leia nearby. When she reached out for her sister through the Force, all she felt was this horrifying emptiness. The forest is so dense here. What if her speeder ran into a tree? Tess panicked. She could be really hurt. Or, your sister knows what she's doing, Tess, Luke assured her. She said she raced speeder bikes as a kid. I'm sure she just found herself further out than I did, and it's taking her longer to walk back. Not letting himself think about where Leia could be or what could have happened to her, Han turned to the soldiers. Take the squad ahead, he ordered. We'll meet at the shield generator at 0300. Luke motioned for the droids to follow as he started northwest with Han, Tess, and Chewbacca. Come on, R2, we'll need your scanners. The smaller droid beeped an excited response as he rolled after the others. Don't worry, Master Luke and Mistress Tess. We know what to do, announced 3PO. He turned to his counterpart. And you said it was pretty here. Tess glared back at the panicky droid. How does a pile of scrap metal sound to you? Pretty? The golden droid stopped in his tracks, and if he had an expression it would be one of pure shock. Good heavens, no. Chapter 34. The search for Leia was a dead end so far. 2 scans 400 meters apart resulted in no trace of her, and Tess was growing more and more worried by the minute. Looking at the wrecked speeder that Han found, Tess couldn't stop imagining Leia's charred, lifeless body crumpled beside it. She turned around and found Luke staring at something in his hands. "Did you find something?" Tess asked, hopping over a log. The Jedi made a failed attempt to hide what he found behind his back. Realizing there was no use in hiding it from her now, he handed over the helmet in his hands. Tears stung Tess's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Leia's?" she stammered. Luke nodded solemnly. Tess's imagination went horrifically wild, picturing all of the terrible things that could have happened to her sister. "What if she—" "Hey," Luke stopped her. He made a fist and knocked her on the top of the head with his knuckles, just to get her attention. "Where's your helmet?" "It was too hot, so I took it off when we were waiting for you," Tess explained defensively, surprised that he would judge her for misplacing something when Leia might be hurt or worse. "Then we left in such a hurry that I forgot to pick it back up again." "Well, maybe Leia had the same idea," Luke suggested, putting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Maybe she was here, took the hat off, then forgot to grab it again the next time she was on the move. This doesn't mean anything. At least not yet." Suddenly, in her head, all she could see was Leia. She was fine at first, then suddenly a blaster bolt hit her in the upper arm and she recoiled in pain. Tess grabbed her own arm, getting a prickly feeling in the exact spot that she just imagined Leia getting wounded. She looked up at Luke with tears in her eyes. "We have to find her." "I know," Luke whispered, wrapping the teenager in a hug. "And we will." Tess tried to calm down in Luke's arms, but all she could see was Leia in pain, and it was driving her crazy. "Luke!" came a familiar smuggler's voice as he trudged in their direction. Tess and Luke broke the hug and made their way towards him. The Jedi and his former apprentice pushed through stray branches to meet up with Han, Chewbacca, 3PO, and R2. At Han's feet was the wrecked speeder Tess had already seen. Luke looked down at it, biting back any possible conclusions given the evidence. "There's 2 more wrecked speeders back there," Luke informed his friend. "And I found this." Han's expression sunk as Luke threw him Leia's helmet. He turned it around in his hands longingly. Tess could hardly watch. Han was not the kind of person to get emotional, so seeing him like this didn't make Tess feel any better. To make matters worse, 3PO, ever the bearer of bad news, announced that R2's sensors once again found no trace of Leia. Han sighed sadly. "I hope she's all right." Suddenly, Chewie let out a growl of excitement. Tess wasn't an expert on the Wookiee language, but she did recognize that as something along the lines of, "Look, over there." Tess perked up and followed Chewbacca, as did the others. "What?" Han called after his friend, growing impatient when the Wookiee didn't answer. "What, Chewie?" Trailing behind Chewie, Tess stopped when he did and found herself looking at a slab of meat hanging from a tree limb. She groaned with frustration. "Ugh, can't you think of something other than food right now?" Tess snapped. She paced in the other direction while the others caught up to see what Chewie was looking at. "Hey, I don't get it," Han said, staring at the dead animal with confusion. "Nah, it's just a dead animal, Chewie." Tess took a seat against a tree a few paces away. She was feeling tears coming on and she didn't want any of them to see. "Chewie, wait, don't!" Luke cried. Suddenly, Tess looked up and her friends were swept together in a net and pulled far off the ground. Tess sprung to her feet and ran over to the suspended trap. It was incredibly high. She wouldn't even be able to reach it if she was standing on Chewie's shoulders. "What the? Are you guys okay?" Tess called up. "Great, Chewie," Han muttered. "Great. Always thinking with your stomach." "We're fine, Tess," Luke informed her from his cramped position in the net. "Han, can you reach my lightsaber?" Tess looked down with a disappointed sigh, seeing Luke's weapon lying on the forest floor. "No," she answered for the smuggler, "but I can." A collective groan came from the net. As the only survivor of the trap, Tess looked around. "There has to be some way to set it loose, or else what's the point of catching anything?" "Branch ornaments," Han suggested. Tess ignored him. She followed the rope from the peak of the net up to a thick tree branch, then followed the branch to the tree trunk. It was swallowed with vines and entwined with another tree, perfect for climbing. The 15-year-old rebel attached Luke's lightsaber to her belt and started to pull herself upwards. "Whoa, Tess, wait," Luke interjected. Tess didn't stop climbing. "Your sister's going to kill me if you fall and break your neck," added Han. The girl rolled her eyes. "Well, we can't find my sister until I climb up there and cut you down," she pointed out. The vines were incredibly convenient. They were so dense that there was always one to grab and ascend with, and so thick that they easily held her body weight. Finally, Tess reached the long, thick branch that held the net. She could see the contraption it was connected to from where she was. Carefully, the girl steadied her feet on the trunk of a branch. "Tess, be careful," Luke reminded her. Nodding compliantly, Tess's eyes focused on her feet. She moved one in front of the other, her arms out at her side to maintain her balance. Left foot, right foot, slowly, carefully. For Leia. Come on, for Leia. All of a sudden, Tess saw Leia's face again. Leia's face, twisted in pain as a blaster bullet struck her in the arm. Tess's feet shook from under her, sending her falling to the branch and tumbling off it. Cries of "No!" and her friends calling for her came from the net as Tess's arms flailed, reaching for something until her hand wrapped around a vine. It was partially attached to the branch with several thinner vines, but the thin one snapped under Tess's weight, and without their support, the thick vines swung her into the trunk of the tree with a thud. She put her hands out in front of her to brace the impact, which was a good decision until she felt her fingers crack from the collision with the tree. Still, she miraculously managed to hang onto the vine. Han, Luke, Chewbacca, and even the droids were overlapping each other as they called out to Tess, asking if she was all right or not. But through their cries, she heard an odd sound. Some sort of humming, or maybe an animal making noises. They must have heard it too, because they stopped talking to her and started looking down to see what was there. Tess's eyes scanned through the leaves and vines on the forest floor, but she didn't need to look as hard as she thought. As if out of nowhere, several furry heads popped up. They were muttering in an alien language. One of them exposed a woven-like box cover on the ground. Only then did Tess see that there was another rope connected to the net, coming from the tree right across from hers. There must have been a release latch under the woven box cover because the net suddenly dropped and her friends fell to the ground. All Tess could do was watch from several meters up in the tree. "Don't say anything, Tess," echoed Luke's voice in her head. She looked down to see him meeting her eyes. He was communicating with her through the Force. "They don't know you're up there. You're safe now, so keep it that way." Tess bit her lip nervously. The small aliens, which almost resembled tiny, cute versions of Wookiees, now spoke in more of a chant. "Ewoks," Tess whispered to herself. She had read up on Endor before they arrived, and she just connected their descriptions with the real thing. Tess couldn't hear all of the conversation down there, but the Ewoks seemed to be bowing to 3PO. Before she knew it, the tiny furry aliens were tying her friends to logs and carrying them off. As soon as the Ewoks were nearly out of sight, Tess climbed down from the tree and raced after them. She hoped with all her might that she would run into Leia on her way. Chapter 35. Tess lingered behind the Ewoks just long enough so that they couldn't see her following. The cute little furry creatures trotted along, singing something in their alien language as they walked. It almost made Tess forget that they had her friends tied to sticks like animals. As much as she hated most of the other rebels, she wished they were here so it wouldn't be all up to her to save them like this. The Ewoks lived in trees where they had constructed various levels and ramps leading up to a camp high above the ground. Tess exhaled, looking up at the structure. There was no way she could get up the ramps undetected. Ramps were one way. There was no place to duck and cover if she were to be spotted, and the last thing she needed right now was her own hands and feet tied to a long branch. It became clear to Tess that her only choice was to find a place to climb, again. She looked down at her hand. Her knuckles were cracked and bleeding a little from where she rammed it into the tree, but she had been focusing her energy on healing it, as Luke had taught her, and it felt much better. Nothing seemed to be broken. Once the Ewoks were all at least 3 levels up on the ramps, Tess Naberrie began to scope out her tree of choice. She was hoping for one like the last, covered in vines that provided hand and footholds in every direction. After a few moments of searching, which included disturbing piles of human remains, Tess managed to find a tree that was not quite a mess of vines, but definitely had a climbable amount of branches. The only problem was that the first branch was incredibly high. At least it was a problem until Tess remembered she knew how to force jump. Being force grounded, she sometimes forgot she was special. Tess's scratched up fingers clung to the lowest branch. She carefully pulled herself up and then proceeded to the next branch. The higher she went, the denser the branches became. Searching for a branch was not a problem anymore, but ducking under them and climbing over them became a more time-consuming one. Finally, Tess reached the level where her friends and most of the Ewoks were, with even more human remains than on ground level. She was pretty sure Ewoks didn't eat humans, but she wasn't about to underestimate the alien creatures. She watched them, hidden by the branches of Endor's trees. If the hut-like structure she was next to had some sort of window, she could climb in, but she had no such luck. Once again, Tess nearly felt the need to smack herself in the forehead for forgetting what she had and what she could do. Luke's lightsaber was still attached to her belt. Both excited and nervous, Tess ignited the lightsaber and plunged it right into the wall. She quickly carved a hole big enough to crawl through and pushed the wall in. Her crawl became more of a tumble when her foot caught on a branch and she rolled forward, knocking over a table-like structure with a rock on it. Tess froze, hoping she didn't alert anyone to her presence. She could hear the festivities of her friend's capture going on outside. She hoped that was loud enough to muffle the noise she made. The hut she was in was connected to two separate ones. The one on the left led to a main deck where most of the Ewoks and her friends were, as far as Tess's ears could tell, and the right seemed to lead to more huts and decks. She hoped the Ewoks hid her friend's weapons somewhere nearby because Tess didn't really come up with a plan, and blasters would definitely help get the attention of the human-eating furballs. Tess was halfway into her room when she heard something from the adjoining one. She held her breath. Was that a human voice? It sounded like it. Damn this thing. Tess recognized the voice immediately. It was Leia. As if their force connection suddenly ignited, Leia dropped what appeared to be a busted comm link that she was working on. She turned her head and met eyes with Tess's. You're okay! Tess exclaimed with relief, running forward to hug her sister. Leia hugged Tess back tightly and then pulled away to look the girl over. Are you all right? Asked the princess. How'd you get separated from the squad? Leia noticed her sister's hands and wrapped them in one of the cloths the Ewoks had given her to wash her face. She hadn't used that particular one, so it was clean. We were looking for you, Tess explained. Luke came back alone, and when you weren't with him, and he saw that you hadn't come back first, we went out looking for you. With Chewie, Han, and the droids. The squad's going to meet us at the shield generator. Tess couldn't help but notice her sister's change of clothes. Leia was wearing what appeared to be a long-sleeve white jumpsuit under a brown short-sleeved dress, complete with matching lace-up boots. Her hair was even taken down from the crown of braids so that most of it fell loose around her back and shoulders, saving a braid woven like a headband from one side to the other. Leia noticed that Tess was looking at her outfit and looked down at it as well, shrugging slightly. They made it for me, she clarified. At first I refused it, but they insisted, and getting out of that filthy outfit I've been trekking around in for days was starting to sound like a really good idea. How exactly did you get to be so chummy with them anyway? Tess asked curiously. With Han, Luke, and Chewie and the droids, they... Suddenly, Tess was reminded that her friends were still in trouble. As if to clarify that, the sisters heard drums sounding from the platform they were being held on. Tess raced in that direction with Leia close behind her, even though the latter of the two didn't fully understand what was going on until they emerged from the main hut. Leia and Tess barely saw their friends tied to sticks before they were stopped by several Ewoks with spears. I thought you said they liked you, Tess questioned her sister. They do, Leia snapped. She looked down at her new Ewok friends in confusion, trying to understand them. They tried to grab Tess, but Leia pushed them away from her enough for the small aliens to understand that she was a friend of Leia's. Unfortunately, it was much harder to explain that with Han, Luke, Chewie, and the droids. But these are my friends, the princess tried to explicate. They think 3PO's their god or something, Tess added. What? chuckled Leia. After realizing Tess was serious, she turned to the golden droid. 3PO, tell them they must be set free! Despite their attempts and 3PO's, the Ewoks continued to pile sticks under their friends. They started a small fire under Han, who helplessly tried to blow it out. Tess suddenly turned to Leia. Can I be ungrounded? She asked quickly. What? Leia asked, confused. I'm force grounded. I'm not allowed to use the force anymore, Tess rushed. For this particular emergency, can I be ungrounded? Leia immediately nodded. 3PO, Tess called to the droid. Get them to look at me, then translate. The 15-year-old force jumped onto the roof to help get the Ewoks' attention. 3PO translated as Tess spoke. As we've been trying to explain to you, the Golden Man is not our god, she explicated. But we do have a god. A most powerful one. And he can be summoned with this device. This device shows our god's will. She pulled out the silver cylinder that formed the handle of her lightsaber, leaving it illuminated. Perhaps we are not the ones to tell you to set our friends free, but he is. At that, Tess threw her lightsaber up in the air as high as she could. Then, closing her eyes and concentrating harder than ever before, she felt herself grasp and illuminate the lightsaber. The green beam of light descended, blade first from the sky, slowly moving towards the deck they stood on. The Ewoks ran in fear, breaking away from their prisoners and some retreating to their huts. The lightsaber lowered first to Luke. Tess's head hurt from the concentration. Leia watched her sister intently from below the roof. "You can do it," Leia's voice told her from inside her head. With careful precision and a bit of Luke's help, the blade of the lightsaber cut the ropes that bound Luke's feet. Next, it cut his hands. Luke Skywalker stood up unharmed and smiled proudly up at Tess. Tess once again eyed the Ewoks that were still outside of the huts. The lightsaber hovered above Han as if pointing to him. Once again, Tess spoke and 3PO translated. "I do believe my God is requesting that you free this one, as has been done to the other," Tess suggested. Without hesitation, the Ewoks raced to set every single prisoner free. Luke raced over to wrap Leia in a hug, and then helped Tess down from the roof just in time to see Han and the princess run into an embrace. "That was phenomenal," Luke told his former Padawan with a proud smile. "I was just going to float 3PO and hope that would make them think he was about to unleash his wrath, but if they actually expected him to do it, I had nothing but that was a show." "Wait, that was Tess?" Han blurted, making his way over to the two of them with Leia by his side. "I thought that was you, Luke." "You didn't help?" Tess questioned. Luke grinned. "I was there if you would have needed it," he confessed, "but you didn't. That was all you." Chapter 36. Tess watched her feet sway back and forth, hanging lazily off an Ewok-made bridge. She could hear 3PO telling their new friends the stories of their travels across the galaxy in the nearby hut. The Ewoks listened fixedly as the golden droid used his programming to create the exact sounds of exploding ships and clashing lightsabers. It seemed the Ewoks enjoyed making clothing for human females, because even though Han and Luke were much dirtier and sweatier than both girls had been, the short, furry aliens felt compelled to make another dress for Tess. 3PO may have mentioned something about it being typical of Ewok culture to offer gifts to the women of a visiting party, but Tess wasn't really paying attention. The 15-year-old reached out her palm. She dreamily floated her blue-green lightsaber above it, watching the reflection of the night stars play on the cool metal. She slowly guided the device through the air and traced her name with it, a control exercise Luke used to make her do. Once that became tiresome enough, she ignited the lightsaber and started carving her name into a nearby tree. Sometime during the first couple characters of her last name, Tess's sister emerged from the Ewok hut and sat beside her. Leia just watched and said nothing. "Getting tired of snuggling your smuggler?" Tess asked. "Say that 10 times fast," Leia joked, and no force powers. Tess couldn't help but laugh. "Not even the force is that powerful," the younger sister chuckled, assuming it would help at all with tongue twisters. Leia shrugged. "I don't know," she sighed, her shoulders lifting and falling. "That's your department and Luke's. I have no idea what the Force can and can't do." Tess wondered where this was going exactly. Sometimes Leia was as clear as day to her younger sister, and sometimes her intentions were so clouded that Tess questioned whether she could read the princess at all. "So," Leia continued, meeting Tess's eyes, "I think I should get a better understanding of the Force before I decide whether it's bad for you or not." There was a time where hearing that from Leia would have sent Tess jumping out of her boots with joy, but this moment was not like that. Expecting quite the opposite of Tess's simple nod, Leia looked her sister over. "What's the matter?" she asked with soft concern. Such a good question. Tess had been asking herself that question all night. The Force was once a link to who she was. Not being able to use it was like smothering her very identity. But now that she was a bit older, she saw just how remarkable she was for her age and experience. If Force sensitives were as common as the natural shipmen and racers in pilot academies, the Empire wouldn't want her and Luke's heads on a stick. "There's still so much that I don't know," Tess finally responded, exhaling through the words as if relieving some burden. Leia turned to face her. "About what?" asked the princess. "Me," Tess blurted, her eyes moving towards Leia's. What am I? Leia froze. Her dark eyes widened like saucers, as if caught in a lie, but she tried to hide it. She quickly changed her demeanor from guilty to comforting. What do you mean, what are you? Leia uttered softly, tucking a hair behind Tess's ear. You're my sister. Tess gently moved Leia's hand away. Am I? Asked the 15-year-old with uncertainty, pulling herself to a stand. You once told me that Padme Naberrie died 8 years before I was born. Was that a lie? Tess could sense Leia's unease. She always knew that the princess kept secrets, but as this conversation started, Tess could feel that she had hit those confidences right between the eyes. No, that was not a lie. The princess rose to her feet, reaching a height not much taller than Tess. The younger of the two felt tears well up behind her eyes. Then which is the lie? She demanded. They can't both be true. You can't say that our mother died before I was born and then say that we're sisters. Neither of them are lies, Leia insisted. She put a hand on each of Tess's shoulders as an attempt to calm her down. Tess, there's still quite a bit that you don't know, but what you do know is all true. I have a right to know the rest, Tess insisted angrily. It's not a coincidence that I'm Force sensitive, or that I'm your sister, or that Bail Organa kept me locked away close by like some big secret. And some, if not all of these coincidences, are the reason that the Empire is after me. But there's something else that is connecting all of these, and you're not telling me what it is. What is it? Leia just stood there, looking down at her sister. She said nothing. What is it? Tess repeated. What aren't you telling me? Tess, I can't. Yes, you can! Tess cried, blue lightning flying from her fingertips and hitting the wood beneath her. The 15-year-old looked at the black scorch mark with confusion and fear, and then snapped back up at Leia for an explanation. Her expression softened a little as tears began to fall. Was I born like this? Was this done to me? Sometimes I just can't control it, she sobbed. There's this emptiness, almost a darkness. It seems like, I don't know. Her voice trailed off. Tess took several deep breaths before continuing. Was I born like this, or was it done to me? Did someone make me like this? Tess caught Leia in a moment of tensing up during her last sentence. That's it, Tess muttered. Someone made me like this. I can feel it now. Though one would imagine the certainty of an answer she had wanted for so long would be comforting, she dreaded that particular explanation. But it all made so much sense now. That's not it, Leia interjected. Not exactly. Please, Tess, just drop it. I won't do this now. Then when, Leia? Tess exclaimed. Do I have to find out when Darth Vader drags me kicking and screaming to a torture room? Because he seems to know, and Chid Deltron knew something, that was for sure. Wouldn't you rather I hear this from my sister? Assuming that wasn't just a lie? She paused, her chest heaving with anger as she caught her breath and stifled her sobs. Or maybe, she muttered darkly, you just can't bear to face whatever the hell your picture-perfect daddy got into to get stuck with me. Maybe Bail Organa wasn't so perfect! Suddenly, Tess was silenced by a slap to the face. Just as quick as she gave Tess a hard strike to the cheek, Leia's hand retaliated back and clapped over her mouth in shock. The princess shook her head slowly, tears pouring from her eyes. Tess, I'm so sorry, Tess screamed. Her chin quivered, absolutely livid. I know he was perfect for you, but Leia, if he wanted to do what was best for me, he would have explained things a long time ago. You have no idea what it's like. Not knowing where my mind goes, the possibilities. I have no idea who I am or what I'm doing here or why, because you didn't tell me. Leia's head fell forward with sobs. She attempted to stifle them with her hands. Whether she had a response or not, she was in no position to give one. But Leia, Tess stated more calmly, you can. Please. I know you have some idea of how and why I'm standing here with you right now. Please, Leia, I need the truth. I need to know who I am, why I ended up here with you, Luke, and Han, why the Empire is interested in me. Tess looked down at her fingers, which glowed blue from residual anger. Why I can do what I do. Leia just stared at Tess at first, expressionless. Then she spun around and began walking towards the hut. Tess grabbed her arm. Where are you? I won't tell you. Leia snapped at her sister. Before the younger could retaliate, the princess held up a finger to pause her. I won't tell you, Leia reiterated evenly, because I have to show you. Chapter 37. Leia paced outside one of the Ewok huts, nervously picking at her fingernails. She heard Bail Organa's voice playing on the holoprojector, and within another minute or two, Tess would know everything. Had she made the right choice? It pained her to go against her father's wishes, but Tess was older now, and the circumstances were not what Bail expected. At the rate they were going, as much as Leia hated to imagine the Empire getting a hold of Tess again, hearing the truth from the wrong people was a very real possibility. Leia couldn't have that happen. Just then, a warm presence calmed the princess. Leia, said Luke, walking over to her and placing a hand on her shoulder. Are you all right? I'm fine, she assured him quickly. She forgot that she could never fool this Jedi. Still, she wasn't up for explaining the Tess situation to Luke, so she pulled to a more westward deck where he couldn't hear Bail Organa's holocron message. Ever the intuitive one, Luke seemed to understand that Tess was not a topic of conversation that Leia wanted to get into. Besides, Leia sensed something else on his mind. What is it? The princess inquired. Luke smiled slightly. I do believe the last time you asked me that, the Jedi Knight reminded her. I told you to ask me again sometime. I guess now is better than ever, huh? Leia readily welcomed the distraction from whether or not she was doing the right thing for Tess. Seeing he had her attention, Luke gained the courage to ask her a question. Leia, he began. Do you remember your mother? Your real mother? Just a little bit, Leia said after a moment. She wasn't expecting that. She died when I was very young. That was a bit of an understatement. Leia was told that her birth mother died soon after childbirth. Still, somehow Leia remembered her mother. The Jedi was surprisingly eager. What do you remember? Just images, really, feelings, Leia told him. She could tell on Luke's face that he wanted more. The princess closed her eyes. She imagined the woman she often saw in her dreams ever since her adoptive mother died. She was very beautiful, the young woman continued. Kind, but sad. The princess eyed Luke again. Why are you asking me this? Luke sat down on the rail of the bridge, looking down. I have no memory of my mother, he confessed sadly. I never knew her. This was very unlike Luke. He rarely talked about the many friends and family that he had lost, particularly during the past 4 years. Something was wrong. Luke, tell me, Leia insisted. What's troubling you? Vader's here, Luke informed her. Now, on this moon. Leia thought she heard him wrong at first. What did that have to do with anything? How do you know? She asked, a chill running down her spine at the recollection of that dark mask that destroyed everything she'd ever known. I felt his presence. He's come for me. He can feel when I'm here, he explained. That's why I have to go. As long as I stay, I'm endangering the whole mission. Leia knew better than to doubt Luke by now. If he said Darth Vader was here, then Vader was here. What about Tess? Leia asked urgently. Can he sense her? I don't know, Luke said honestly. All I know is that I have to face him. Why? Queried the princess. Luke grew silent for a moment. Leia could feel a sort of darkness about him. Finally he spoke. He's my father. The air caught in Leia's throat. No. There was no way. Someone as kind and good as Luke could not possibly come from a cruel, heartless monster. Leia was speechless. There's more, Luke assured the princess, though she could hardly process the last revelation. It won't be easy for you to hear it, but you must. If I don't make it back, you and Tess are the only hope for the Alliance. Luke, don't talk that way, Leia interjected. You and Tess have powers I don't understand and could never have. And Tess, if I have anything to say about it, she will never have to see Vader again. Luke frowned. He obviously didn't want Tess in danger either. He decided to address her later comment first, since his Padawan was a touchier and more difficult subject. You're wrong, Leia. You have that power too, the Jedi promised Leia. In time, you'll learn to use it as Tess and I have. Luke looked down and thought, the Force is strong in my family. My father has it. I have it. And my sisters have it. Leia just stared at him. Her brain told her mouth to say that it was impossible, ridiculous, but somehow, in her heart, she knew that Luke was right. Their connection. It was a connection between siblings. Brother and sister. Like her connection with Tess, but just slightly different. Yes, Luke assured the princess, as he saw that she understood. It's you, Leia. You and Tess. You're my sisters. I know, Leia gasped, astounded at the revelation yet amazed that she hadn't seen it before. Somehow, I've always known. Then you know why I have to face him, Luke assumed. For you. And for Tess. He'll come after you if I refuse. No! Leia protested. She jumped to her feet. Luke, run away! Far away! Take Tess with you if you have to. You can't face him. I wish I could go with you. No, you don't, Luke insisted, taking her hands. You've always been strong. Tears welled up in Leia's eyes. But why must you confront him? Because there's good in him. I felt it. He won't turn me over to the Emperor. I can save him. I can turn him back to the good side. I have to try. Leia bit back tears. Luke gave her hands a comforting squeeze. Then suddenly his sister's eyes widened. No, Leia gasped, shaking her head. No, no, no. Luke could sense what conclusion she had come to. Yes, he said softly. Darth Vader is your father too. No, Leia snapped. Darth Vader tortured me, tortured Tess, and destroyed my home planet. He killed my father. She shook her head furiously. No, Luke. Maybe it's easier for you because you just had an uncle, but Bail Organa was my father. I loved him more than anything else in the world, and Vader killed him. Luke allowed Leia to vent, standing silently. And Tess? Leia inquired. Is he her father? I don't know, Luke answered honestly. But what are the chances that our half-sister's father was also a Jedi? Luke shrugged. Maybe our mother was sensitive, but I honestly don't know, Luke answered. After a moment, a slight smile reached his lips. I wish I remembered her like you did. Before long, it became clear that it was time for Luke to go. Leia did not want to let go of his hands. Luke didn't seem to want to leave either, but he knew he had to. The Jedi leaned forward and kissed his sister on the cheek. After another warm smile, he turned away. Luke disappeared in the blue night fog of the Endor treetops. Chapter 38. Good morning, Annie, Tess sang as she untucked her long dark hair from the collar of her tunic and sat at the table where her breakfast was already in place. Annie turned around to smile at Tess, her beautiful green eyes shining beneath the slight crinkles of age around them. Good morning, Tessie, Annie returned. She crossed the kitchen to give the child a kiss on the head before pulling the long brunette locks together for a braid. Tess winced at the few times her guardian pulled a little bit too tight. Finally, she felt her guardian finish braiding and looked up at Annie with a smile. Only Annie's face was replaced with a black figure, Tess's gasp was silenced with a hand over her mouth. Suddenly, the room around her seemed to disappear. There were no walls, ceilings, or floors, no sky, and no sense of how long the vast expansion of white could have stretched. "Hello, experiment," came a harsh male whisper. He slowly moved his hand away from her mouth. "Who are you?" Tess quivered. The stranger responded by grabbing her head from either side and forcing her to look forward. There was a table there now, hardly noticeable as its white color matched the entire room. The figure on top of it was even less noticeable at first glance. It was a woman. She was lying down, her dark brown curls falling around her shoulders. Her small frame was wrapped in a white silk gown, and her hands poked out of the sleeves to cross over her sternum. Tess heard a short laugh from the stranger. "The real question is," he chuckled, "who are you?" At that, another figure appeared. It stood behind the dead woman in white with a metal cylinder in hand. The device ignited into a blood-red lightsaber, and slowly the blurred figure became a person in a black cloak. The person pulled back their hood. Tess looked into her own face. The cloaked version of herself gave a sadistic smirk, then brought the lightsaber down onto the dead woman on the table. "No!" Tess screamed. Her arms flailed as she recovered from a sudden falling sensation, eventually remembering that she was in one of the Ewok huts. The girl rubbed her eyes and allowed them to adjust. 4 empty sleep sacks lay beside her, unused. Tess pulled herself to a stand. She had purposefully gone to bed early so that Leia would not try to get her to talk about the holoprojector message that revealed how Tess came to be, but it couldn't have been so early that the others still hadn't gone to bed. Only the droids were in the room, powered down for the night. Suddenly, Leia darted around the corner, almost making Tess grab her lightsaber in surprise. "Are you all right?" Leia demanded. Tess raised an eyebrow at her sister. Sometimes Leia was eerily intuitive. "It was just a bad dream," Tess explained quickly. "It was nothing." Tess returned to their hut and sat on her small mess of blankets. Leia lingered in the doorway for a moment, eyeing her sister as if to make sure it was safe to come in. "Tess, about the holoprojector." "Leia," Tess interrupted. "Please, I can't talk about that. Not right now." Leia nodded slowly, taking a step back as if debating whether to stay or leave. Tess knew that they really did need to talk about this together, but right now she was too afraid of how she felt with this newfound information. The anger. The fear. She could feel electricity pulsing down her arms, as if daring to spurt force lightning at the next person she saw. It terrified her. She wished Luke was there nearby to meditate with her and maybe calm her down. "Where's Luke?" inquired the younger of the two. Leia took that as an invitation to join her in their small temporary residence. He's not here," Leia explained slowly. "He went to face Vader," Tess guessed, her face growing worried. "How did you know?" Leia asked her with confusion. Tess thought for a moment, then shrugged. "I don't know. Luke, I've sensed that he wanted to do that for a long time. Every time he heard Vader's name, I could feel that he needed to." Tess's eyebrows furrowed as she tried to explain her complicated master. "At first it was a sort of vengeance, but lately it's more of a resolve. I think it was something Master Yoda told him that he had to do." Leia tried to hide her worry. "I hope he's careful," the princess added softly.